Okay, I think we're happening. Are we happening? There we are.
Ta-da! Hey peeps, welcome to our latest masterclass. And today we're doing a Nebbiolo masterclass, and we're doing it in a new location. We're doing it in our barrel room, and you can see that Henri is very precariously perched in his pelvic area on that there's a sample tap right here on this botti. So this is a very typical vessel that one uses to make Nebbiolo. This is a 1,500 litre botti. It's an Italian gamba. So you can, behind Henri's head, there's a little plaque there that says that barrel is produced by gamba. Gamba is a cooperage. It's an Italian cooperage. And that is a very quintessential vessel that one uses to make Nebbiolo.
Yes, and we will talk more about the relevance and the history of that as we move through the evening. So for those of you who are just joining us, hello out there. Hopefully you can all hear us. Lenny says we're coming through loud and clear. That's excellent. Tonight we are doing another little slightly different format. We're going to try a bit of a masterclass. So tonight we're doing Nebbiolo. Yep. And there was a 3-pack available to buy, but it's a little bit of a special 3-pack. So we understand if you don't want to open it right now. And we're actually going to talk about something very interesting for when you don't quite want to open a wine, but maybe you want to taste just a little bit. We'll talk about that later on. But for the time being, this is more talking about Nebbiolo, and we will taste the wines at the end, but don't necessarily feel like you have to taste along. But by all means, if you bought the 3-pack, you can open them up right now if you want to. That would not be a mistake.
Okay, so let's talk about Nebbiolo. And what is Nebbiolo? So I suppose the Italians like to say that Nebbiolo is their quintessential grand wine.
I believe the phrase is the wine of kings. Sorry, the king of grapes and the grape of kings.
Yeah.
It's Nebbiolo.
And so Nebbiolo is a variety that very few people are familiar with, because I think it's like 99% of Nebbiolo grown in the world is grown in Italy and 1% elsewhere.
Yes. Having said that, Australia is doing very well with this variety. We have started to play with it, and there are a few producers in the country who are taking it seriously. And I think it is a grape that deserves to be taken seriously, because certainly in Italy, it is a very serious grape. Not only is it possibly a little bit of an acquired taste, it's not one of the most easygoing varieties out there, but also if you want to sample some great examples of Italian Nebbiolo, it's going to cost you a little bit of moolah.
Yeah. So the Nebbiolo, the famous wines that are Nebbiolo, 100% Nebbiolo, are wines from the Barolo area, from Barbaresco. And particularly Barolo, you're getting wines that are going to cost you the starting price in Australia, costing you at around $120 a bottle. And so, those bottles aren't really friendly for most people to buy. Those prices are pretty out there.
That's the interesting thing, and that's kind of the beguiling thing about Nebbiolo is, you will find Nebbiolo for under $100, but it's questionable whether or not that is actually good value. And it sounds strange to say that you won't find good value Nebbiolo under $100. And here we really are talking about Barolo and Barbaresco. So, there are Australian and international Nebbiolo wines that are good value at under $100, but if you want the real stuff, it's going to cost you. But it's one of those things that I would almost caution you about getting into Nebbiolo, because it's an expensive habit and it is very much an acquired taste. But once you acquire a taste for this wine, there's really no going back.
It's even more of an expensive habit than, say, champagne is, which is pretty amazing. Okay, let's talk about where Nebbiolo actually comes from, where the home of Nebbiolo is. And the home of Nebbiolo is northwest Italy. It's in the area that we call Piedmont, or the Italians call Piemonte. Okay, and Jack has put on a map there, and you can see that amazingly confusing and colourful map there. And
Glen loves a really colourful diagram.
I know, it hurts my eyes. It's those colours so hurt my eyes, Jack.
So the first thing I need to say is thank you to Wine Folly for producing this amazing image. We have borrowed it from them, so we need to give credit where credit is due. In the bottom there, next to the title, you can see the whole of Italy. You can see the boot kicking little Sicily out into the Mediterranean. And you'll notice that there in the top far northwest corner is a little square that shows you what we're actually looking at on our map. Our map is very bright, very colourful, and you can see that in wine terms, there is a lot going on in this part of the world. Right there in the middle of that bright pink region, you might be able to make out the word Asti. Asti will be familiar to a few people who have heard of a product called spumante.
Ooh, lovely bubbles. Delicious.
Spumante from Asti. Also, this is the part of the world where Moscato comes from, which is kind of a popular drink right now.
Yeah, $8 a bottle at Dan Murphy's. Delicious, mate.
5% alcohol, 100 grams per litre sugar. Delicious.
Nom, nom, nom.
The only difference is, despite the fact that this region on the map is very, very pink, Moscato from Italy is not pink like the Aussie stuff. Just thought I'd mention that. But what we're here to talk about is actually the heart of the blue region. So I'm guessing on your screens it's very, very hard to make out, but the most central little heart of that blue region is the heartland of Nebbiolo. So somewhere right in the very, very centre there is a place called Barolo, which is where we lay our scene. But this whole part of the world makes a lot of good Nebbiolo. And just because we're talking about Barolo as the archetype of this wine, there are many, many Nebbiolo producers all throughout this region. And this is the homeland for the grape.
Yeah. So let's talk about when Nebbiolo was first spoken about. And, when people started pondering about different varieties, etc., Nebbiolo first sort of came into the picture, came into significance in the 13th century. So it's a variety that has had fans for hundreds of years. Nebbiolo is a name that derives from the Italian word nebbia.
As in nebulous. This is an English word we might be familiar with.
So it's about cloud.
Clouds.
So there are two theories about the name Nebbiolo. So one theory is that it's about the fog that comes in and out of the area, that brings moisture into the area, that basically nourishes the grapes to ripening. But then there's also a theory that at the late part of the harvest, the bunches of Nebbiolo grapes, have like a cloudy, sort of foggy sort of film over the grapes. And that film would be, I suppose, wild yeast in reality.
Yeah, we call it the bloom in English.
And the theory is that Nebbiolo, nebbia, comes from those two phenomena, whether it's the fog of the mornings or whether it's the bloom of yeast, the bloom of wild yeast that is produced on those late ripening Nebbiolo grapes. And that's an interesting thing as well. Nebbiolo is really, really, really hard to ripen. Nebbiolo is a very difficult grape to grow. Not only is it early flowering, but it's late ripening.
Why is that a problem?
It is a problem because early flowering means that your grapes are susceptible to late frosts, in these areas. And I think the Piedmont region, they'll be in altitudes. The good vineyards, the exceptional vineyards, are at altitudes of 300 meters, 400 meters in altitude, that high altitude, and also being close to, some of the Swiss Alps, the Italian Alps. They are prone to having late frosts, late snow. And so
when we're talking about a late frost means heading into springtime, which is the time when the vines have flowers. So this is a very dangerous time to have a frost. So if those delicate little flowers get frosted, you got no grapes.
You got absolutely no grapes.
And this is why I'm inclined to believe that the nebbia in Nebbiolo refers to the fog, because the fog is a really critical thing in terms of stopping the frost.
Yep.
Which sounds kind of weird.
Yep. And I think it's that humidity in the atmosphere that's stopping the fog from forming on the grapes. So not only is it an early ripener, an early flowering variety, but it's a late ripener. So it spends a long time on the vine trying to ripen. And all the best vineyards in the Northern Hemisphere, in Barolo and in Barbaresco, the two main areas of that are associated with Nebbiolo, the main successful vineyards are not only south-facing, but southwest-facing. So they get the sun and they get the late afternoon sun as well.
I think we actually have a photo of a foggy Nebbiolo vineyard.
Ooh.
I'm guessing, is this Barolo, Jack? Yes, so this is a picture of a vineyard in Barolo, and it looks pretty foggy to me.
It looks pretty foggy to me, and those leaves, they look like they're turning, so it looks like it's the late part of the season, I would imagine.
I would definitely say so.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm not sure if I can see grapes there or not.
No, I think it's probably...
Could be post-harvest.
Post-harvest. So, Nebbiolo. What else are we going to talk about Nebbiolo? I suppose we're going to get ready to taste Nebbiolo, and then we can talk about the varietal characters of Nebbiolo.
Someone's had too many whiskies.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to prepare to get some Nebbiolo wine to taste, but we can talk about, or we can show you a video on how we got our Nebbiolo. So basically, there's only the two of us. We have got 3 wines that we are analysing today. Between Andrew and I, we could maybe drink 3 bottles of wine a night, but that would mean that we probably wouldn't be able to work tomorrow morning, and tomorrow's a big day.
Well, one of us may not be able to work.
Mm.
However, we are about to have dinner, and unfortunately the wines we're having with dinner are not Nebbiolo, so we're actually not going to drink these wines tonight, but we do want to taste them. So there's an interesting method for extracting a little bit of wine out of a bottle just to have a taste without actually opening the bottle.
And so we're going to use a Coravin, and Jack is going to put on the screen a little video on how we use a implement called a Coravin. Jack, take it away. Hey peeps, today we're going to use a Coravin. So a Coravin here, it's a little implement to extract some wine out of bottles, and so that we don't have to open them properly. So here we've got a little needle, like a hypodermic needle, and we're basically going to put this device into action. The hypodermic needle pierces the cork. The device has an argon gas cylinder here. The device pumps in some argon into the bottle, and the bottle being pressurized with argon, it pushes the wine out of the bottle. And we're going to use this wine, we're decanting this wine right now so that we'll be able to drink it tonight for our Nebbiolo tasting evening. See you tonight. Ciao. Thanks, Jack.
Thanks, Glenn.
Oh, thank you, Andrew. So yes, as you can see, we decanted some of the wine out into these conical flasks, and we're ready to drink them. We have three Nebbiolos that we have produced: a 2012, a 2014, and a Nebbiolo blend that we call the Rosso. It's a blend of Nebbiolo and Barbera, and that's a 2019.
And that's an interesting story, and one that is very much a part of this part of the world that we've been talking about, where Nebbiolo comes from. Although ours obviously are homegrown Queensland wines. In Piemonte, in Barolo, there is actually a very interesting little part of Barolo law, and that's LAW, not LORE, where legally Barolo is a very small region. It's a very clearly demarked parcel of land where you're allowed to make a wine and call it Barolo. So these people who have these vineyards have some of the most expensive patches of dirt in the world. They're on par with Champagne and Burgundy and places like that. And the nature of it, it's very hilly, and as Glenn mentioned, it's a very difficult grape to grow. But on top of that, they are actually required to declassify 15% of their harvest. So you go out there in Barolo to your famous Barolo vineyard and you harvest these grapes that are so difficult and require so much time and attention and care to nurture and bring to fruition. And then you actually have to pick 15% of your entire harvest and go, that's the worst 15%. It's the worst of the best. So I am going to declassify that. I'm going to take that out of my Barolo wine, and I'm just going to call it Nebbiolo, and it's going to go to a lesser quality wine. And we're not going to get into the appellations of Italy right now because, let's face it, we don't have a week. But there are other lesser wines, which they quite often refer to as Rosso. So a greater region that encompasses the Barolo Barbaresco part of Italy is called Langhe. And there's a great value, great fun drinking wine called a Langhe Rosso, which you can declassify your Nebbiolo into a Langhe Rosso. So it's a really great little buying tip. If there is a good Barolo or Barbaresco house who also makes a Langhe Nebbiolo or a Langhe Rosso, you might actually find that some of that fruit came from one of these incredibly prestigious Barolo vineyards.
And this is the interesting thing about the whole declassification issue, is that it retains that exclusivity. It retains that high price for Barolo.
There's just not much of these wines made.
So, Andrew, we've got three wines here. We've got a 2012, 2014, and a 2019. What are we going to drink first?
Well, traditionally you would start oldest and finish with youngest when tasting reds. You would go the opposite with whites. There's a reason in this lineup you might do it differently, but we're going to go traditional. So let's taste the 12
Good man.
to start off with.
Good man.
Also because I haven't tried this wine.
I know.
I don't even know.
So it's interesting. The 2019 is our current vintage. The 2014 is still being sold in Sydney. There's still a couple of dozen bottles left in Sydney. And we were lucky enough, Andrew and I were lucky enough to be in Sydney last week. And we tried the 2014 for the first time in a long time. We were greatly surprised, pleasantly surprised. 2012, these are some of the last bottles left of the 2012.
Which is a huge pity.
Awesome. When we talk about the vineyard where we source these grapes from, this vineyard is about 6 kilometers away from our winery. It's a vineyard that slopes northwest, so the perfect aspect for Nebbiolo. These grapes, I remember in 2012, were harvested very, very late. I'd have to have a look at our notes, but it could be as late as early May.
This wine predates me, so I don't know.
Nebbiolo. What are the varietal characters of Nebbiolo? One thing about Nebbiolo is that it's usually very tannic. There's a lot of on the palate, a lot of tannins. When we consider tannins, think of drinking a cold cup of tea and think of how tannins in tea coat your mouth and make your mouth furry. So Nebbiolo, all about the tannins.
All about the tannins, but all about the acid. And Nebbiolo is it's a bit of a strange wine. And as I said, it's an acquired taste. When it's particularly young, it can be incredibly aggressive because those tannins can be short and chunky and aggressive and really drying on the palate and
raspy, absolutely.
In wine terms, we would say pretty crappy color. It never looks deep and dense and rich. It always looks a little bit heading towards that orangey brown color, not dissimilar to Pinot Noir, but probably even worse than Pinot Noir. But for such a wine that looks light in the glass, Nebbiolo always has tannins that are up here. It has acidity that is up here. It likes to get ripe, so often the alcohol is up here. Even in this place, this cold, foggy place called Barolo, they can quite often approach 14% alcohol. And that's because they hang for so long in the vineyards and they take so long to get ripe that you get that sugar ripeness along with that ripeness of skins and seeds and flavors in the grape. So it's kind of light colored, but it's high everything else and flavors as well. And I think that's probably the thing that is so alluring about Nebbiolo is that it is just one of the most complex wines there is.
And so the classical varietal characters for Nebbiolo is tar and roses. It's almost like a Guns N' Roses sort of thing. Tar and roses, you know. And you've got that beautiful classical perfume of those old rose petals, a beautiful red, rich rose, beautiful old rose petals. And then you've got this really strange bitumen-y, tarry sort of like smell as well. So it's this really complex perfume, but then this deep, deep flavour and aroma. Nebbiolo tends to be quite earthy. You tend to get these sort of like cherry those sort of like red sort of berry sort of qualities, but then you also get this underlying brooding earthiness.
Absolutely.
And it's interesting when you look at the cuisine of this part of Italy. You know, you look at things like truffles.
Mm-hmm.
You look at things like wild boar.
Mm-hmm.
You look at these really sort of like earthy, rustic sort of flavors.
You also get that Germanic influence. There's a lot of cream and butter in this part of the world. There's lots of rich, proteinaceous, fatty things, which is why this super high tannin style of wine works really well. That tannin and that acidity helps to cut through the richness of, you know, wild boar sausages with truffled mashed potato and amazingly dense, rich food like that.
So 2012, this was an exceptional year, and I'm really pleased to see this wine, and I think Jack and Robbie and Chip that are making our dinner tonight, I think we're going to open up this wine because I think it's going to be a treat. It's going to be a treat to see that this 8-year-old wine is traveling really well. And, you know, that brings into question, what are the good aspects in a wine? What are the good characteristics in a wine that's going to give longevity to a wine? And I think this wine, even though it's 2012, still has some length. It still has some time in the bottle.
Absolutely. I mean, Nebbiolos and these northern Italian Nebbiolos in particular are famously long-lived wines. There's a saying amongst producers that when you make Barolo, you don't make it for yourself and you don't make it for your children. You're making it for your grandchildren to enjoy, which might seem a little extreme, but it's actually not that far from the truth. Here in Australia, our approach is a little more modern, and this is something else we can touch on, speaking of the region. But these wines have all the hallmarks of quintessential ageability. Having said that, I think this is a discussion for 2 weeks' time when we are doing a Q&A session on cellaring and serving wine. So I'm going to stop you there.
All right. Just one quick segue. The Botti, 1,500 litre barrel. This is a traditional barrel that the Piedmontese use to make Nebbiolo.
Why does that matter?
It matters because of the maturation of the wines and how the tannins develop, how the fruit develops. In a large vessel, there's less influence of oak imparted in the wine. There's less surface area of oak to wine ratio as opposed to a smaller barrel. Smaller barrels have more oak to wine ratio.
More oak per litre, if you like.
Oak per litre. So in a large vessel, you've got that, you have very little oak flavour imparting in the wine. And so therefore, it's not the oak that is Are we talking now?
Sorry, I'm not sure how long we've been muted for, but we're all good now.
Okay, so I'm just going to get a little bit of Nebbiolo out of Henri's pelvic area.
In the meantime, if you missed it, we were talking about oak and barrels and how size matters, which is very relevant to Henri's pelvic area. There's also another thing, which is one of the most famous arguments in the world of wine, which is about traditional producers and modern producers in Barolo, in this particular part of the world. And the argument is about whether to adopt modern winemaking techniques and philosophies or whether to preserve the old ways. And I'm not going to comment on either side of this argument, but really it all evolves around whether you use these beautiful big old barrels. And when I say old, I mean literally old barrels. I mean barrels that have been used for decades, if not centuries, as opposed to using new barrels and small barrels, which give more oak flavor and create wines that are more approachable, more enjoyable to drink at younger ages and with less requirement for aging. And this is a really interesting thing to talk about. And I'm not going to comment too much other than to say maybe there's room for both.
Exactly. Well, having just taken a sample out of the botty, and that is a very, very, very light wine, but it is a very delicious wine. I'm very excited about that. This is the first time that I've seen this wine in 2 months.
And can I say last time he looked at it, he was not so excited about it. So
I'm excited about it now.
It's coming around, definitely.
It's good. Okay, we
Moving
digress. On. Let's go. Oh, I'm getting a bit pissed now. That's good.
2014.
Bit of whiskey first, now some Nebbiolo. 2014, as I said, Andrew and I had the opportunity to see this wine in Sydney last week for the first time in about a year. And so this is the second time in about a year that we've seen this wine. I used to call this wine my dirty bitch, and it was very, very stinky. And we've always had to decant this wine. Let's talk about decanting, Andrew.
Briefly.
Why does one decant wines?
There are two main reasons you would decant a wine. In the case of a wine like this, 2014, it's not particularly old, and also Nebbiolo doesn't have lots and lots of solids in it. So the reason to decant a wine like this is to give it air and to let it breathe. So when Glen refers to his dirty bitch, what he means is that the aroma of this wine was a little bit funky. And the kind of funk we're talking about comes from yeast that was struggling during fermentation.
Yep.
When the yeast struggle, they make some flavors and compounds and particular molecules that are very volatile, so you can smell them very readily. And they are compounds that, on the one hand, create interest, but if there are too many of them, they can make a wine a little bit unpleasant to smell.
So those compounds have sulfur in them. So there are 20 different amino acids in proteins, but there are 2 amino acids that contain sulfur. When yeasts are under stress at the end of a ferment, they start to metabolize. They start to eat these sulfurous amino acids, these sulfurous proteins, and they produce aroma compounds that are quite sulfurous. So those aroma compounds can be, people describe them like baby poo, like a nappy.
Yeah,
doesn't sound very appetizing.
Cabbage, onions.
And so, therefore, when you get these stinky stinky sort of wines, they become less stinky. They benefit in having a bit of air, in being decanted. So, do we talk about how one decants wine? Do we talk about that? We're talking about that in the next.
We'll save that, but I will say we quite often use the term blowing off when we talk about these slightly unpleasant aromas, in that because they are very volatile, which is what makes them so important for the aroma. If you give your wine a good decant, or if you don't have time for that, you pour yourself a very small amount and you basically swirl the crap out of it.
And this is why we have big glasses.
That helps these slightly unpleasant aromas to basically just evaporate out of the glass. And hopefully what they leave behind is more of that beautiful, delicate, pure fruit that we're trying to uncover from these
stinky little
reductive
bitches.
aromas. Yeah.
Stinky bitches.
Reductive aromas.
Yeah. Okay. This is a wine that needs decanting. And we usually decant this wine for about 2 hours, 3 hours. And that's the great alluring thing about Nebbiolo. Nebbiolo often is a wine that needs decanting. And it's a wine that changes during a meal, that changes during an evening. And it's an alluring wine in the way that as you're enjoying your food and as you're getting a little bit more tiddly, a little bit more pissed, you not only get different flavors, different aromas, you have a different experience when you're drinking your wine. And it's, I think, an example of how wine is alive. It changes constantly. And it's an animal. It's an animal that changes.
I think it's also a hallmark of what makes a truly great wine. If you've been watching, or if you go back and watch this later, you may notice that I actually spend more time with my nose in the glass than I do actually tasting the wine. And for me, when I find myself doing that without even realizing it, that's one of the things that tells me that this is a complex, alluring, interesting, moorish wine. It's the kind of wine that you can linger over and play with, and it's the kind of wine that slowly unfurls one leaf at a time as you go, and it has this amazing depth and complexity and character that is just utterly beguiling.
Yeah, it's layer after layer. And I think if you're looking at the white partner to Nebbiolo, something that has a huge amount of layers in the white world, I always think of Chardonnay. I think Chardonnay it's like a tablecloth. You take one cloth and there's another cloth underneath, and it has layers. It has cloth. It's like a table with lots and lots of tablecloths that you.
It's like pass the parcel.
Yeah, it's amazing, and if you had to choose the grand wines.
We're not playing this game, are we?
Oh, come on. If you had to choose the grand wines of the table, getting flavor after flavor after flavor, it's Nebbiolo for reds, it's Chardonnay for whites.
I'd also add Tempranillo to the list. I think Tempranillo is a wine of layers.
Okay, we've digressed. Let's go to our last wine, which is the 2009 Rosso. 2019, indeed. So 2012 to 2014 to 2019. This is our current release.
So if the 12 and the 14 were Nebbiolos, which we refer to as Ballanolo, which is our Ballandine Barolo, but we're not allowed to say that. You didn't hear it from me. Why did we call this one Rosso?
We called it Rosso because the Nebbiolo wasn't dense enough. It wasn't expressive enough to make a wine that was 100% Nebbiolo. It was still a delicious wine. In the barrel room, and you can't see, we can't sort of turn the camera around, but we're surrounded by barrels here in the barrel room. And, when we looked at the 2019 Nebbiolo, it just didn't really cut the mustard. It didn't have that intense tannins. It didn't have that intense depth of flavour that either the 2012 or the 2014 had. It was bright. It was fun. It was a delicious wine, like this wine here. This wine will not make a Ballanolo. So the 2019, bright, interesting, generous, but it didn't have that power, that oomph behind it. So it was never going to be our Barolo style of wine.
I think for me, looking at the development of this wine, it became clear fairly early on that it didn't have that depth and complexity. And, we talk about layers. So if you think about it vertically, this Rosso is the top half of a really good Nebbiolo. It has that nice firm tannin structure. It has that beautiful juicy acidity. It has really bright red fruits. It's got that cherry,
bright
cranberry
aromatics
kind of thing. And it even has those florals on the top, which everyone talks about rose, but I've always seen Nebbiolo more in terms of violet. Candied violets, that really, really high, almost heading towards nail polishy, organic chemistry kind of aromas, which is just, when it's right and when it's in balance, is exciting. And I think this wine has all of that stuff in the top. But what it doesn't have is the tar factor. It doesn't have that deep, black, brooding darkness and power that great Nebbiolo has.
And so hence because of that, we've blended this Nebbiolo with Barbera. And Barbera is another Italian variety.
Mm-hmm.
Nebbiolo Barbera is a very quintessential blend of northern Italy. And a lot of wines from Langhe are Nebbiolo Barbera, aren't they?
Yeah, so Nebbiolo, Barbera, and Dolcetto, which is another beautifully generous grape. Those are kind of the three workhorses of that Langhe Rosso style, that style of, and this is really common to so many parts of Europe, is that you have the wine that is famous for that region, but then you have the wine that the people actually drink. And this is a really common story in so many parts of Europe, is that, you have the famous celebrated wines of the region, and then you have the yummy, approachable table wines that the people actually drink. And this whole Langhe Rosso thing, this is what they drink in this part of the world.
Yeah. And I think this is a wine that goes so well with food. It's got that really lovely thirst-quenching acidity, that cleansing of the palate, but it has that density that the Barbera gives, that generosity in the mid-palate that makes this wine, again, moreish. It's like, for me, it's like a pyramid, this wine. You've got these ethereal, aromatic, perfumey. For me, it's old roses. It's those old big red rose, classical rose varieties, that perfume, and then it's got that generosity of flavour that the Barbera brings, I think.
Yeah, for me, the Rosso style and varieties like Barbera in particular, it's just that quintessential wine that goes with anything that has tomatoes in it. Any kind of pizza, pasta, slow cooked wet dish, anything that is just based on that idea of bright red acidic tomatoes is just where this wine is at home.
But the acidity also goes well with fatty food, you know, and you know, I'm a pork eater. Give me pork any day. Pork on your fork.
See, I'm into like classics. I'm thinking margarita pizza or spaghetti and meatballs. Gnocchi bolognese.
Anyway, I think that's it. Do you think that's it?
Well, did we have any questions, Jack?
No questions.
No questions.
Good. All right, because I'm getting pissed, can I just say? And
special series of Shiraz that we made in 2015. So another cellar release, but 3 incredibly academic wines, as Glen likes to say.
yeah. So this is our trilogy, and our trilogy is all about one vineyard. A vineyard that's about 7 kilometers away from the winery. It's a vineyard that has 15 rows of Shiraz, and it's looking at the ripening criteria, the ripening experience of 2015.
It's going to be a very viticultural journey.
Yeah.
In the meantime, if you have any questions about what we discussed this evening, or if you have any burning questions about how to cellar or how to serve wine, please drop them to us on social media, send us an email. We are Glen or Andrew at lpm.wine. So Glen at lpm.wine, Andrew at lpm.wine. Get in touch. Let us know what you'd like to know, because that helps us to make this so much more engaging and interactive. And of course, like the last Q&A, if you want to send us a video message, then you can get your own little 2 seconds of fame.
Hey, Brisbane, Sydney, I see we've got Cape Town, we've got London. Great to have you guys with us. We love you. Thanks for your support. We'll see you in 2 weeks' time. Thank you. Bye.